My granddaughter's name is Ruthie, and she has been after me for 2 years to put this into words. She'd sit across the kitchen table from me with her hands folded the way her grandmother used to fold hers, and she'd say, "Grandpa, you have to tell it. Not because it'll make sense. Just because it happened, and you were there, and nobody else was. So here I am, 80 years old. One story I never told in full, not to my neighbors, not to the men I used to sort mail alongside at the post office in DeKalb County for 31 years, not even to my daughter, who would have worried. Ruthie convinced me, and I owe her the truth of it. To understand what happened that October, I need to go back to June. Not October, and not the morning I am going to tell you about. I need to go back to my wife June, and to a habit she had, and to what I did with that habit after she was gone. June Thornton was not a large woman, and she was not loud, and the space she took up in a room was entirely disproportionate to her physical size, which was slight. She had been a farmer's daughter from down near the Caney Fork, and she had the kind of patience that comes from spending childhood watching things grow at their own pace, whether you wanted them to or not. We were married 46 years. I did the rural route for 31 of those, up and down those foothills in every weather God ever put together, and every morning before I left, she had coffee on the counter and a small blue dish on the porch railing with apple slices on it. Not a plate. A dish, the kind with a shallow lip, blue glaze on white clay, with a small chip on the rim where she had once knocked it against the railing post and laughed about it for the rest of the morning. She had bought it at a church sale somewhere around 1987, and she used it every morning for the birds. The birds came, cardinals mostly, and a brown thrasher who showed up each spring like he owned the property. She called him Gerald. I told her that was an undignified name for a bird, and she told me Gerald didn't seem to mind. By the time I'd be backing the mail truck out of the county lot, she'd already be on the porch watching whatever came to the dish, her coffee going cold in her hand because she forgot to drink it. That was June. 46 years of that. She died in late November, 3 years before the morning I'm telling you about. It was not sudden, which people sometimes think is easier. It was not easier. It was a long autumn of small losses, each one its own conversation that we managed as best we could, and then one Tuesday she was gone, and the kitchen felt about twice the size it had ever been. I kept the dish going. I want to be honest about why, and honesty requires me to admit I didn't entirely know why at the time. Part of it was habit, and habit after 46 years of marriage is a physical thing, not a thought. Part of it was that stopping felt like a second loss I wasn't ready for. I'd get up before light, slice an apple the same way she had, thin half-moons cut at a slight angle, and put the dish on the railing. The birds came. The brown thrasher came back that first spring, and I stood at the kitchen window and watched him, and didn't say his name out loud, though I thought it. Thought it clearly enough that it surprised me. My dog Burl sat with me through all of it. He's a blue-tick hound, going on 11 years old at the time of that October, with the kind of slow, blinking dignity that old dogs develop when they have decided the world is more or less what they expected, and they are content to observe it. He had been June's dog first, in the sense that he preferred her lap to mine, and after she passed he transferred that preference to the rug in front of the wood stove, where he took up residence like a piece of furniture that breathed. The property is 22 acres on the eastern side of a long ridge in the Tennessee foothills, the kind of land that isn't flat enough to farm in any serious way, but grows a good woodlot and has a creek in the lower pasture that runs clear 9 months of the year. I bought it with June in 1979 for a figure that sounds comic now. The house is a 2-bedroom frame structure with a covered porch running the full width of the front, a wood stove in the main room, and a kitchen that was always too warm in summer and always smelled like coffee. It still smells like coffee. I still make too much of it. The second autumn after June died, I nearly stopped the dish. I need to describe that carefully, because it matters to the rest of the story. I was not dramatic about it. I am not a dramatic man. I had been carrying the wood splitting in the back of my mind for 2 weeks, the way you carry a task you don't have the heart for. I had a cord and a half of ash and red oak that needed splitting before the cold set in hard, and I had started on it one Saturday morning in late September, gotten through maybe a third of it, and then just stopped. Put the maul down. Sat on the splitting round for a while, looking at the woodlot, and then went inside and sat in the kitchen instead. That was not like me. I had split wood every autumn since I was 17 years old. I knew the weight of a maul and the grain of ash and the way oak splits clean with one stroke if you read the log right. I was not too old for it, and I was not too tired in any physical sense. I was tired in some other way that I didn't have a word for, and sitting in that kitchen with too much coffee and not enough in the day to do, I began to wonder whether I was keeping the dish going for the birds, or for June, or for some idea of the man I had been when June was alive to watch me be him. That thought was not comfortable company. I went 3 days without putting the dish out. Burl noticed. He's a dog, so I can't tell you what he actually knew, but I can tell you that those 3 mornings he sat by the front door and watched me go to the kitchen and watched me not go to the porch. And he did it with the kind of patient attention that felt, I'm aware of how this sounds, like a comment. On the 4th morning, I put the dish out. I don't know what decided it. I woke before 5 with the room very dark and very cold, and I lay there for a while listening to the wood stove tick as it lost the last of its heat from the night before. And then I got up and sliced an apple and went out to the porch in my work boots with my coat over my pajamas and set the dish on the railing. The air had that particular edge that you get in the Tennessee hill country in early October, the kind that isn't bitter yet but is making its intentions clear. The tree line was a dark wall 30 yards off, the ridge behind it already losing its leaves in the upper canopy, and the eastern sky was the colour of old pewter. Burl came out and stood beside me, and we both looked at the tree line for no particular reason. Nothing moved. I went inside and made coffee and went about the day. That was on a Wednesday. I want you to understand that I'm a man who spent 31 years on a rural mail route reading weather and road conditions and the particular silences of country that told you something was wrong before you could put a name to what it was. I had catalogued more mornings on that piece of land than I could count. I knew what a fox sounded like moving through the lower pasture. I knew which limb the red-tailed hawk used when he was watching the field below the woodlot. I knew the sound the creek made when rain was coming 2 days out. I am telling you all of that because I want you to understand that when something on that property began to depart from the ordinary, I was not a man who missed it. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not total silence, but a shaped silence. The kind where the sounds you expect are absent and you don't realize it consciously until you're already standing still with your head up. Thursday morning, the day after I'd put the dish back out. I came to the porch at first light with my coffee and the dish, and the birds were not there. Not just absent from the railing, which was ordinary enough in the first cold weeks. Absent from the tree line entirely. No woodpeckers working the ash stands. No crows in the upper branches. The ridge above was grey and completely still, which was not right for that hour. Burl was already on the porch. He was sitting up, ears forward, which was not his resting posture. He was looking at the woodlot, not at me. His tail was not tucked. He was not growling. He was doing a thing I had seen him do maybe twice in his life, which was a kind of absolute focused calm that was different from his ordinary calm in the same way that held breath is different from breathing. I put the dish on the railing and stood beside him and listened. Nothing, in the sense of no threat, no noise, no movement I could locate. A slight wind off the ridge that had frost in it. The property just sitting there in the early light, familiar as my own hands. I told myself, cold front moving through. Changes the air pressure, changes what sound carries. The birds will be back by mid-morning. I had a version of that explanation ready, because I had seen weather do strange things to animal behavior for 31 years on that route, and it was the kind of explanation that was true often enough to be useful. I went inside. The birds did not come back by mid-morning. They did not come to the dish at all that day. Friday morning I came out and the dish had been moved. I want to be precise about this. The dish had been on the porch railing when I came in Thursday evening. I had noticed it still there, the apple slices dried out and untouched, and I had left it for the morning. Friday, when I opened the front door just before 6, the dish was not on the railing. It was on top of the woodpile, which was 10 feet to the left of the porch steps, and it had in it 7 wild pawpaws arranged in a row, each one placed with its stem end up, spaced evenly enough that it looked deliberate. I know what deliberate looks like. I have been a precise man my whole life, and I can recognize when something has been placed with care. I stood there for a long time. I picked up one of the pawpaws and turned it in my fingers. It was cold from sitting out, but the skin was unbroken, and the fruit firm, the deep yellow-green of pawpaws ripe in their season, smelling faintly of something between mango and old orchard. The smell that comes out of a pawpaw thicket on a warm September afternoon. I put it back in the dish in the place I had taken it from. My first explanation was a neighbour. I have one neighbour close enough to matter, a woman named Doris who lives 3/4 of a mile down the road and who had brought me 2 casseroles after June died and who occasionally left things at my mailbox. I drove down and knocked on her door at 7:30. She had not been on my property. She did not grow pawpaws. She looked at me with the careful expression people use when they're not sure whether to be concerned, and I thanked her and drove back. My second explanation was raccoons. A raccoon can move a dish. A raccoon cannot place 7 pawpaws in a row with their stems up. I did not have a third explanation yet, so I wrote down what I had seen in the small notebook I keep in my coat pocket, the same habit I had from 31 years of noting road conditions and delivery anomalies. Date, time, what I found, exact placement. I am a man who writes things down when he does not understand them. It is not a system that produces answers, but it keeps the facts clean. If you've been sitting with a strange thing on your property and you're not sure what to make of it, I understand that. I'd be grateful if you stayed with me a little longer, because this is where it starts to become something I couldn't write down and make sense of. I put the pawpaws in the dish on the railing and refilled the dish with fresh apple slices beside them and went about my day. Saturday morning I found the wood. The firewood I had abandoned in late September, the 1.5 of ash and red oak I hadn't been able to finish, was split and stacked. Not all of it, the portion I had left undone. The logs I had quit on when I sat down on the splitting round and looked at the woodlot and then went inside. That portion, maybe 40 pieces, was split and stacked against the side of the house with a neatness that would have satisfied me on my best day. The rounds were split clean, each piece faced the same direction in the stack, the bark outward the way you do it to shed rain. I sat down on the porch steps. Burl came and sat beside me and put his chin on my knee. I put my hand on his head, and we stayed like that for a while. I have to tell you what that wood meant. Not the wood itself. What I had not been able to do. I had stood there at the end of September with a maul in my hand, and the splitting half done, and I had not been able to continue, and I had gone inside, and I had not talked about it. Not to Ruthie on the phone, not to Doris down the road, not to anyone. I had just carried it. The way you carry a thing when you are 80 years old and you have been carrying things alone for 3 years, and you do not see the use in putting them down because the ground is cold and there is no one to help you pick them back up. The wood was split and stacked. Someone had finished what I could not. I'm not a person who believes easily in what I can't account for. I want to be clear about that. I spent 31 years on that route, and I have seen people in this county get fooled by wishful thinking more times than I can count, and I swore early in my life that I would not be one of them. But I had 2 failed explanations, and a splitting job done in the night by something that left no vehicle tracks on the gravel, no footprints I could identify, until I got down on my knees at the edge of the woodpile and looked at the frost in the grass beside it. The impressions were large. I do not want to overstate this, so I will tell you what I measured with my boot, which is a size 10.5. The impressions were roughly 2.5 times the length of my boot, with a width across the ball of the foot that was about equal to the length of my hand from the heel of my palm to the end of my middle finger. 5 toes, clearly defined, the weight distributed the way a walking stride distributes it, heel to toe. Not the flat-footed stamp of someone carrying something heavy. The stride length, as best I could pace it toward the tree line, was somewhere between 5 and 6 feet. I stood at the woodpile for a long time with my notebook in my hand and nothing to write. Whatever had been here had walked from the woodlot to the woodpile, finished the splitting, stacked the wood, and walked back to the tree line. The splitting round had been moved slightly, rotated about a quarter turn from where I'd left it. The maul was leaning against the house, handle up, the way you put a tool when you're done with it, and being respectful of it. I had not left it that way. I had left it lying in the leaves when I walked inside. I want to tell you what I did next, because it tells you something about the kind of man I am. I went inside, and I made coffee, and I ate toast standing at the kitchen counter, and I did not let myself think about it for 2 hours. I have a mechanism like that, a trained postponement of reckoning, that served me well on the mail route when something needed solving and thinking about it while driving wasn't going to help. I washed the dishes. I folded laundry. I called Ruthie and talked to her about nothing in particular. The weather, how her classes were going, whether she was eating enough. I did not tell her what I'd found. I almost did. The words rose up in me twice, and I swallowed them both times because I did not yet know what I was holding, and you do not pass a thing like that to someone you love until you have weighed it yourself. Then I went back outside, and I put fresh apple slices in the blue dish on the railing, and I sat in the porch chair that had been June's chair, which I had not sat in since the November she died, and I waited. I sat there most of the afternoon. Burl was at my feet. The sky came down low and grey the way Tennessee sky does in October, when the light is going early and the air smells like cold iron. The cardinal came to the dish around 3 o'clock, and I watched him without moving, and he didn't seem bothered by me. A red-bellied woodpecker worked the near ash tree for a while, the small drum of it carrying clean across the yard the way that sound does, when there is no other sound to compete with it. The light moved from pewter to a thin gold, the kind of light that sits low on the hillside in late afternoon and makes the bark of the hickory trees look warm. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be honest about that too. I was sitting in June's chair, which was the first time in 3 years, and I was watching the light, and I had, for the first time in longer than I could account for, no sense of urgency about getting up. The cushion under me had her shape worn into it still, and that was a thing I had been afraid to find out, and finding it out turned out to be a softer thing than I had feared. Burl lifted his head. He did it slowly, not with the sudden alertness of a dog who has caught a threatening scent. He raised his head from his paws with the same absolute calm he had shown Thursday morning, ears forward, eyes on the tree line at the far left edge of the woodlot. His breathing did not change. His tail was flat but not tucked. He was watching something. I did not turn my head immediately. I had enough years on that land to know that the way you look at something at the edge of the woodlot can matter as much as whether you look. I turned slowly, the way you turn when you don't want to startle a deer. It was standing at the edge of the woodlot, partially behind a large ash tree, and partially not. I will tell you what I saw as plainly as I can tell it, because plainness is what I have to offer. It was very large. I have looked at horses and draft horses and cattle my whole life, and whatever was standing at the edge of my woodlot was taller than any of them, 8 feet or 9 feet at my best estimate, with a width across the shoulders that made the ash tree look slender beside it. It was covered in dark fur or hair, the colour of oak bark in wet weather, brownish black and heavy-looking, and it was standing upright the way a man stands, not the way a bear stands when it rises, which I have also seen, and which looks nothing like this. The posture was still, not frozen still, the way an animal goes still when it has detected a threat, still in the way of something that has decided to be seen. I did not move. I am 80 years old now, and I was 77 then, and I have had a long time to think about what passed between me and that thing in the 10 or 15 seconds we looked at each other across that patch of open ground. I cannot tell you what it was thinking. I cannot tell you why it came. I can tell you that it looked at me, and I looked at it, and neither of us did anything, and the air between us felt the way air feels before rain, full and held and waiting. Its eyes caught the last low light. I do not know what colour they were in any other light. In that light they were amber, very clear. And they were looking directly at me with an attention that was not threatening and not indifferent, and that is the most precise description I have. I felt my own breath go shallow and then steady, and I felt my pulse in my throat, and I felt my hand on the arm of June's chair, and none of it was fear. Burl did not growl. He made no sound at all. He had his chin raised and his eyes forward, and he was, as far as I could tell, entirely at peace. Then the thing at the tree line turned, not quickly, not fleeing, the way you turn when you have finished something and are ready to go, and it moved back into the woodlot in 3 or 4 long strides, and the shadows took it, and it was gone. The woods were quiet for a moment. Then a crow called from somewhere up the ridge, 2 short notes, and the woodlot settled back into its ordinary evening sounds, and Burl put his chin back on his paws. I sat in June's chair until the light was fully gone. I did not try to make sense of it that night. I have learned in 80 years that there are things that need a little time before they will sit still enough to look at clearly. And that evening was not the time for thinking. I went inside and fed Burl and made soup from what was in the pantry and sat by the wood stove until the fire burned low, and I thought about June, which was different than the grief thinking I had been doing for 3 years. It was quieter. It was more like company than like loss. I measured the tracks in the morning. That is when I got down on my knees with my boot and my notebook and wrote down the figures I gave you. I paced the stride length. I noted the pressure of the heel versus the ball of the foot. I am a man who writes things down. I have a small notebook for that year, and those pages are still in it, and the handwriting is neat and the numbers are exact. Because that is how I do things. What I could not write down was what it felt like to sit in June's chair for the first time in 3 years and have something at the edge of the woodlot look at me across the cold October air with that steady amber-lit attention, and for it to not feel threatening, and for Burl to be calm beside me, and for the birds to have come back that afternoon after 3 days away. I could not write that down in a form that would survive being read back to me without embarrassment. I can say it here, because Ruthie convinced me to say it. I felt seen, not watched, seen. There is a difference. And if you have spent 3 years alone on 22 acres with a dog and a small blue dish and the ongoing project of keeping a habit alive for reasons you aren't entirely sure of, you may know what I mean. The next morning was Sunday. I got up before light and I sliced an apple, and I went out to the porch in the cold and I placed the dish on the railing, and I watched the ridge for a while. Nothing unusual. Burl sat beside me. The brown thrasher came at first light, which was early for him, and worked through the apple slices with businesslike efficiency. I called him Gerald out loud for the first time since June died, and he ignored me the way he always had, which seemed right. That evening, I called Ruthie. I did not tell her the whole of it on that call. I told her I had been thinking about her grandmother, which was true, and that I was doing all right, which was truer than it had been for a while. She had a quality in her voice of trying not to push me, which I appreciated. We talked for 40 minutes, which was the longest we had talked since June's funeral. "You sound different," she said. "Do I?" "Yeah, I don't know. Less far away." I told her I had sat in her grandmother's chair on the porch. That was all I said about it that night. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm glad." And I could hear what was underneath that, which was relief, and I thought about how long she had been carrying her half of this quietly, and I felt sorry I hadn't called sooner. I finished splitting the last of the wood myself the following week. There wasn't much left, maybe a third of a cord of smaller pieces that had been underneath the logs I hadn't gotten to. I worked through it in an afternoon, steadily, without stopping. The maul felt right in my hands again. The ash split clean. I put the dish out every morning through that October and November and into the winter. I never saw the thing from the woodlot again in that same direct way, not standing at the tree line looking back at me. There were 2 other mornings that winter when Burl sat up with his ears forward and looked at the woodlot with that particular quality of focused calm. And on both of those mornings, the pawpaw tree at the edge of the property had a branch broken clean at a height of about 10 feet, the kind of clean break that weight makes, not wind. I noted both in the notebook. I don't know what to make of them, and I'm not going to tell you I do. What I can tell you is that the second winter after June died and then the third were different from the first. Not easier, exactly, which is not a word I trust when people apply it to grief. Different. The kitchen felt closer to its right size. I started going into town on Saturdays again, to the hardware store and the feed store, and occasionally to have breakfast at the diner on the square where I'd been a regular for 20 years before I stopped going. The man at the hardware counter, a fellow named Clyde who had known me since before June died, said one morning in March, "Good to see you getting out, Cody." And I told him it was good to be out. And that was true. Ruthie came for Thanksgiving that year, and for Christmas. And that spring she spent a weekend helping me clear the lower fence line along the creek pasture, which had been June's project and which I had let go for 2 years. We worked through most of a Saturday with loppers and a handsaw, and she asked good questions about the property and listened to the answers, and at one point she asked me if I was happy, which is a thing her generation asks directly without embarrassment. And I thought about it for a while before I said that I thought I was getting back to something like it, which was as honest as I could be. She's the one who started pressing me about the October story. Not that first visit, but by her second summer she had noticed the notebook on the kitchen table and asked about it, and I told her it was where I kept notes about the property, which was true, and she let it sit. Then one evening she asked me directly why I had started sitting in her grandmother's chair again, and I told her the short version, which was not very short, and she sat across from me with her hands folded like her grandmother's hands, and she listened to all of it without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Grandpa, you have to tell this." I told her I wasn't sure it would sound like anything except an old man who was lonely and not sleeping well. She said, "It sounds like something happened to you." something real. I didn't argue with her. I've learned in 80 years that Ruthie is rarely wrong about what is real, and when she is wrong in an interesting direction. So here is what I believe, stated as plainly as I can state it, with the understanding that I am not a man given to beliefs I can't defend in the clear light of a cold morning. I believe something was on my property for at least a part of that autumn, and I believe it had been there other times without my knowing. I believe it moved that dish and arranged those pawpaws with care, which is not a thing I can explain, and which I have stopped trying to explain. I believe it split and stacked that wood, and that the work was clean and done with knowledge of what the work was supposed to be, and that is not something any animal I know about could do. I believe it came to the tree line on that October evening and stood where I could see it, and I believe it did that deliberately, and I believe it looked at me with the attention that I have described. What I don't believe is that I have any business telling you what it was. I have a neighbor down in Cannon County who would tell me it was a bear. I have a cousin in Cookville who would tell me I was dreaming. I have seen both bears and dreams, and I know the difference between them and what I saw, and I'm not going to spend whatever time I have left arguing about it. What I will tell you is what changed, and I'll keep it brief because the changes themselves are not complicated. I went back to putting the dish out. I went back to sitting on the porch in the evenings. I called Ruthie more. I went to town. I finished the fencing along the creek. I said Gerald's name out loud to the brown thrasher every spring, which he continues to find irrelevant, and which I continue to do anyway because June thought it was the right thing to do and her instincts about birds were better than mine. I don't know how to explain what happened in terms that would satisfy a skeptic, and I've stopped wanting to. A skeptic would need me to produce evidence that can be held in a hand, and the evidence I have is in a small notebook and in the shape of the rest of my life after that October. I think that is the only kind of evidence that matters for this particular thing, which is not nothing. Ruthie asked me once whether I thought it would come back. I told her I didn't know. I told her that some mornings, when the light is particular on the ridge and the air has that cold iron quality it gets in October, and Burl lifts his head from the porch and looks toward the woodlot with his ears forward and his eyes calm, I feel something I don't have a precise word for. Not fear, not quite hope. Something closer to the feeling you get when a long, quiet room fills with a warmth you didn't start, and you understand that it was there before you came in. She wrote that down. She said she was going to remember it. I told her she got that habit from her grandmother. I'm 80 years old. I have known this piece of land for 45 years. I know the sound the creek makes when rain is 2 days out. And I know which hickory the red-tailed hawk prefers. And I know the grain of ashwood and how it splits. And I know the way June used to stand at the kitchen window watching Gerald work through the apple slices on a cold morning, forgetting to drink her coffee. I do not know what stood at the edge of my woodlot on an October evening and looked at me across 30 yards of open ground with amber eyes and no threat in its posture. I have not needed to know. That season passed the way all seasons pass on that land, into the next one and the next, and I am still here in the mornings and the dish is still on the railing, and Burl is getting old now in the way that old dogs get old, slower each year, more settled, more at peace with the shape of things. This past spring Ruthie was sitting on the porch with me, and Burl lifted his head and looked toward the woodlot, and we both looked with him, and there was nothing there, or nothing we could see, which may or may not be the same thing. She reached over and put her hand on my arm and didn't say anything. I put my coffee down and we sat there in the early light, the three of us, and the birds came to the dish one by one, and the morning went on the way mornings do, patient and particular and its own kind of answer to the questions you stopped asking. The dish is still out there,